What's up, everybody? So following Max Holloway's sensational performance over Justin Gaethje at UFC 300 to claim the BMF title, the UFC now has a mega fight on their hands, and that is between Max Holloway and the champ at 45 now, Ilia Topuria. Ladies and gentlemen, if the UFC does not book this fight next, I will be absolutely stunned and I will be shocked. Now, before we kind of break down and talk about what we're looking at here between these two sensational fighters, I want to bring up the fact that I, predicted Max Holloway to finish Justin Gaethje. I didn't expect Max Holloway to look as good as he did at 155, and that kind of brings up the point of I really want to see Max stay at 55. I want to see him stay at 55. I'd love to see him go on a run there. I just feel like the UFC is going to really encourage him to go back to 45 to take on Topuria for the 145-pound strap. Now, you may say, hey, Ilia Topuria and Max have been going back and forth online. Ilia's had a lot to say. They've been kind of bantering and doing all this and that. And Topuria's like, listen, man, I'm only going to fight Holloway if it's for the BMF strap and all this and that. Listen, guys, we know the UFC and Dana White absolutely love Max Holloway. He is who Dana looks at as one of the greatest featherweights of all time. Now that Volk is not sitting on the throne, I would find it incredibly hard to believe with this potential opportunity that they would not find a way to make Max Holloway versus Ilia Topuria happen down at 145. Now, I target this to possibly happen at UFC 306 for the Sphere because they need a huge stylistic matchup that is going to draw, that's going to be a mega fight, all that kind of stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, this matchup is crazy, and the UFC has got to book this next. And I know you might say, well, hey, man, Volkanovski, he deserves the rematch. He should be next, and all these different things. And you're exactly right. Volk absolutely deserves a rematch against Topuria. The problem is, I don't think the UFC wants them to rush right back into this thing because, one, they want to give Max Holloway the shot, and two, I think it just ends the same way. I think it ends the same way, and I think the UFC is going to need to protect Volk and his team from themselves because they are going to be fiery. They want to get back in there, and they want to get one back on Topuria, but Volkanovski's coming off of 2 KO losses, back-to-back. So now we're at this interesting point where what do we do? And if I'm the UFC, I'm finding a way to get this fight booked. And it has to be for the 145-pound strap at this point. Ilia's got to defend the belt here. Because if you're not going to give Volk the rematch, it's got to be, him defending the belt at 45, in my opinion. When we look at this stylistic matchup, we're talking about Max Holloway, who people like to call the best boxer in the UFC, going in there against who I was the first person in the MMA community to bring up the outstanding, sensational, traditional boxing skills of Ilia Topuria. This is an unbelievable stylistic clash between these two guys, man. And when we look at this fight, one, I need to see it. And it would basically be best boxer on the line. Because when we look at Ilia, he may not have the same output as Max Holloway, but he has sensational power in his hands. He used to fight at 55, so we've seen Max at 55. We've seen Max in, back-to-back performances of KO victories. One was at 45 against the Korean Zombie. Now, at 55 against Gaethje. So he'd be coming back down. So the question is, how would that power, would it still be there for Holloway? How would that weight cut be, considering he was just at 55? But say it all goes well. This is going to be an absolute banger. This is going to be a banger. And Ilia Topuria, if you're looking for a guy that is dripping with confidence, has sensational skills, it's Ilia, man. And he talks a big game, and he's a guy that can back it up. And what we saw him go in there and do to Alexander Volkanovski was nothing shy of spectacular. And I know people want to point out he's coming off a loss to Islam Makhachev. He got knocked out and this and that. Dude, Volkanovski was on in that fight against Topuria, man. He looked great to start that fight. He was moving really well. He had the feints going on, the leg kicks, the jab was on point. It was just a matter of time before Ilia Topuria was able to beat up that lead leg, compromise Volkanovski's movement, close him down, and eventually get him out of there. But when we talk about one of the best strikers inside the UFC, it's Max Holloway. And people point at him as the best boxer. I need to see Holloway go in there with his boxing skills up against El Matador, who I think has the best traditional base in terms of boxing, to where if we were going to pick some guy up and drop him in the ring today, who would do the best? I think it would be Topuria. From the stance, the way he approaches fights, it's very Canelo-esque. The way he digs to the body, all these different things. But nonetheless, I truly believe the UFC is going to try to book this matchup. And I think it's one of the biggest fights they can make inside the UFC right now. Because when we look at these two guys, I would give the grappling edge probably to Ilia, man. This guy grew up, a sensational wrestling background. He's got good submissions. He's a guy that likes to keep the fight on the feet, to where I think that this would be a striker's delight. I think we basically get a boxing match at this point. But the evolution that we've seen in the game of Max Holloway makes this fight a lot more interesting than what I think it could have been years ago. This new elusive Max Holloway, which is what led to me picking him to beat Justin Gaethje by finish, is he's a lot more elusive. He's okay taking a backward step. He moves incredibly well laterally. And he's just sitting on shots a lot more now, guys. Like, everyone always pointed out how Max Holloway does not have knockout power. He doesn't have this. He doesn't have that. He absolutely has knockout power. He's always been a guy that just loves to accumulate damage and kind of floats around and never digs in fully and buries his feet into the canvas and twists and turns on these power shots. And what you saw him do against Zombie, what you saw him do against Justin Gaethje, when he plants his feet and decides to commit to a shot, Max Holloway can put somebody out. So when you look at this matchup stylistically, I'd like to think that the speed advantage would be on the side of Max Holloway. I think that he'll be faster than Ilia. I think that he will move a lot better laterally, forward, side to side, whatever. I think he has better movement than Ilia Topuria. The problem is, Ilia has more ways to win the fight. Now, I'm not saying he could take down Max Holloway, which is very hard to do. I'm not saying that he could necessarily submit Holloway. But if we're going to go in terms of the grappling advantage, I got to give that to Ilia. I got to give it to Ilia. Now, when we look at Ilia, this is a guy that's fought at 55, as I mentioned before. We saw he's had some trouble with guys that are a little longer and a little bit lankier. Now, him and Holloway have basically the same reach. Holloway is a little bit taller, so he will kind of be able to play that range game on Ilia. And I just wonder, how would Ilia solve Max Holloway? Because he says, hey, I'd be the first guy to knock him out. I'd be the first guy to put his lights out. And from everything that Ilia said, man, since he's been in the UFC, he's backed it up. He's went in there and done everything that he said he is going to do. So at this point, it's kind of hard to doubt the guy. But when you say you're going to put out Max Holloway, it's like, well, everyone says they're going to do it. And well, not everybody, but people that say they're going to do it, they don't have the same success in being able to do that. What concerns me is we saw Max take some nasty shots from Justin Gaethje and just ate him like it was nothing. To where when he was down at 45 a couple fights before, up against, Yair Rodriguez, Arnold Allen, Korean Zombie, it seems like those shots at 45 had a lot more of an effect than what they used to back in the early days of Max down at 45. That concerns me coming into a fight where Ilia Topuria has outstanding head movement, outstanding combinations, to where he loves to dig to the body and he loves to throw that overhand right that we saw him put Alexander Volkanovski's lights out with. We've seen him close the show against Jai Herbert. We've seen him dig to the body and put people down with liver shots. This man has outstanding boxing, but nonetheless, I believe that this is one of the biggest fights the UFC can put together. I believe it's what they're going to target to put together. And if you are looking for a better if you are looking for the best stylistic boxing match inside the UFC right now, look no further than Ilia Topuria and Max plus Holloway. I think the UFC has a mega fight on their hands, as I mentioned numerous times, and I need to see this thing play out, because from a stylistic standpoint, the way Max is moving these days, him going up to 55, doing what he's done, being the BMF, taking on Ilia Topuria, who, by the way, has never lost in his pro career. Somebody's may have to go, and then Ilia Topuria with the potential to knock out Max Holloway for the first time. Sounds crazy to me, ladies and gentlemen. But I want to hear from you all down in the comments. Like this video, comment your early prediction. Who would you go with in this matchup? Are you riding with Topuria? Are you riding with Holloway? Subscribe to the channel if you have not already. I appreciate you all. See you next time.